Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this discussion on your child's rights, IEPs, and 504s. My name is Shannon Bennett. I'm a patient navigator with Global Genes. I'm also a rare disease mom to a little girl named Kenzie. Kenzie's 9 years old and in the 3rd grade, is a homebound student. She has an ultra-rare condition called MCAP, or megalencephaly capillary and polymicrogyria syndrome. This condition results in a variety of severe, complex, challenging conditions which really complicate her education. My husband, Michael, and I also have 3 sons, Gavin, Kyler, and Jackson, and we reside in West Michigan. Joining us today to talk about family rights and education, we have Elle Cole, published author, advocate, and caregiver, as well as Piper Paul, educational rights attorney with Piper Paul Law. Before we dive in, I'll hand it over to each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves.
Good morning, everybody. I am honored to be able to be here at Global Genes. This is actually my first time at the conference, but I am here because I have an amazing daughter. I actually am the mother of twins. I have fraternal twin daughters, one of whom lives with sickle cell disease and type 1 diabetes. Sickle cell disease is a rare genetic disorder, and it has been one of those journeys that has really taken me from just being a mom to really being a champion in the community to make sure that she receives the rights that she deserves. And also, it has taught both of my girls that you have to speak up, and if something isn't provided, you don't give up, you keep going.
All right, you said brief. I'm a lawyer. I will do my best to be brief. I'm an education lawyer. I represent people with disabilities. I have a particular interest in rare diseases and disabilities. Why? I have a rare disease. And so do 2 of my children. I have narcolepsy with cataplexy that was not diagnosed until I was 40. I am the kid that never paid attention, slept, didn't know what was going on with mom and dad. And I'm also a former paraplegic. I had a significant injury. No one would listen to me, and I almost died. I've been coded twice. I have been in inpatient acute hospitals, intense placements, therapeutic, and a nursing home while having young children. I have so much compassion for this community. It is not a community I thought I would be a part of, but I am, and it is a gift. It is a gift to be here. Hope, courage, determination, strength, and community. We got it. So I come from this as a different place as a lawyer. I hope you don't hold that against me. But I'd like to share some tools today along with Elle for you guys to use.
Thank you for those introductions. Children in the United States have the right to FAPE, free and appropriate public education. To achieve this, there are individualized education programs, or IEPs, as well as 504 plans to help all children access their education, no matter their unique individual needs. To kick off our discussion, I want to start by asking, what are the main differences between an IEP and a 504? Are there advantages, disadvantages to each? And we'll start with you, Piper, if you don't mind.
Sure. So what's important to know is these are federal laws that states have to follow. We have the Individual Disability Education Act. If a student is determined to be eligible as a student with a disability, and then they have a right to an IEP, which has special education related services. That's a higher level program, and many students should qualify for that, but they do not. The other is a Section 504, and the idea of that, it's Section 504 and the ADA go hand in hand. And the concept is the first civil rights law, and you have to have the disability, a substantial impact, major life activities, eating, sleeping, focusing, concentrating, and they have to level the playing field. So that's where you get into reasonable accommodations. Section 504 plans do not have a lot of teeth, which I'm sure some of you know. And districts will often provide 504s instead of an IEP plan. They are very different. And one last thing is, what's important for everybody to know here is the child find mandate, which districts have to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability, all areas, academic, social, emotional, behavioral, adaptive, vision, health, and that often doesn't occur. So that's something I hope you guys take away and are able to implement that so that you can get the right programming for the people you represent, your children.
I like to think of the 504 plan as a section that makes sure that your child's rights are received. So sometimes we think of it as they're giving us this, but that's not the case. This is a mandate, a federal mandate. And so it's not a gift from the school to your child. It has been mandated. It is something that is their responsibility. And so when you're speaking up, when you're advocating for your child, this is their right. And so I like to always think of that, because sometimes we want to really be humble and say, oh, I don't want to, rock the boat. But this isn't rocking the boat. This is making sure your child receives what is mandated for them.
May I,
of course.
One thing I want to note, why many students should actually have IEPs versus 504 plans, because it goes under the IDEA, Individual Disability Education Act. The end goal is so that people can live as independently as possible, go on for higher education, and be gainfully employed. The rights go through age 21 and 22 in Connecticut. So that's the goal and why that can be needed, not in all cases. But if your child has any struggles or your clients in those areas, you want to try to advocate actually for an IEP.
Thank you for that explanation and differentiation between those two. What are some of the best ways to become familiar with the laws surrounding your child's rights prior to that first IEP or 504 meeting? What can parents do to educate themselves before they walk into those meetings for the first time?
I remember being a mom, and a young mom, I like to say. I wasn't as young as I looked, but I was considered a young mom to some, and not so young to others. But I remember being afraid for my children because I have twins. I remember being afraid for them to go to school. And actually, for the first 7 years of their lives, I homeschooled them because I said, I can probably do it better. But I felt like I was cheating my children out of really some of the benefits of being in the classroom. I loved to go to school when I was young. I loved getting together with my friends. And I said, I want my children to have that experience too. And so I really had to do my research. And so for me, that started with a Google search, but it really was talking to other parents in my community. That's where I got really some of the best advice. Of course, you can follow up with your own research. And I talked to my daughter's healthcare professionals, their healthcare team, because really the hospital and her clinicians already had forms that were in place. And when I had questions, I went directly to them to really find out what type of accommodations did other children who had her condition receive. Again, I mentioned my daughter has sickle cell disease, which is a genetic blood disorder that affects your red blood cells that can affect you from head to toe. And she also has type 1 diabetes, and she wears an insulin pump that it's constantly checking. She wears a continuous glucose monitor that is attached to a cell phone. And we've all been hearing about the different cell phone bans, but for her, it's something that is very important that she has to keep with her because it monitors her blood glucose levels throughout the day and allows her dad and I to be able to see what those glucose levels are. And so it was different Facebook groups as well. There were families who were going through the experiences that I was having, and they were all sharing their different experiences. So I would say do a multi-level approach in your research. So talk to other educators that you know. Some of us, we have friends, some of us are former educators, and really just be very open and honest about what your questions are. So that was the approach that I took. And in many of our organizations, like our community-based organizations, they do webinars. And they have different classes. And if they don't have a class, you can suggest a class on 504 and IEP plans. And that is another way for you to get that education from people who are living it, who've done it before you, and who in many ways can tell you what works and what doesn't.
Wow. Where to start? Follow your gut. Something's wrong. What's going on? It's overwhelming, trying to live day to day at times, and then to try to figure out this whole nother language involving the law. There's a tremendous website. You can get a book from rightslaw.com, and you do kind of need to learn the different language and what it means to the best you can. Speaking to the community, watch out for Facebook, get in your community, but sometimes there's wrong advice on those Facebook groups when it comes to the law. Find out who the education lawyers and advocates are in your area. See if you can just talk to them. And some states have advocacy groups. See if you can speak to them so that you can start utilizing the language that you actually need to use to get what your child needs. And that's going to go under IDEA, Section 504, and ADA. And what's also important, and I shared a letter, it's a sample that you may want to consider for some of your providers. And it utilizes 504 ADA language. It's a fill in the blank. And sometimes if you go to the schools and you don't use that language, you may be dismissed. So I think that's a really important to start learning the language under the law. And never give up.
Thank you. Well, they say hindsight's 20/20, and it's something as a mom I'm always thinking about and looking back and thinking, what could I have done differently, or what could I have done to be more effective in communicating what my child needs? Unfortunately, this has resulted in a character flaw and the fact that I always need to feel over-prepared for everything. So for those of you in the audience like me, what advice would you give, an understanding that no two meetings look the same, so in a rather broad sense for families, going into an IEP or a 504 meeting for the first time, what can they expect a typical meeting to look like? And what can they do to prepare before their child becomes of school age? I know before we had our first IEP meeting, some of the questions that I had were things like, do they lead the meeting? Do I lead the meeting? Do I bring my student with me? That sort of thing.
So in my experience, I think it's important to, if you feel like you need support, I think sometimes we go into these meetings. I mentioned that initially I was afraid. And I think that is the CBOs, the community-based organizations, often may have an advocate that you can talk to that may accompany you to your meetings. What I think is great now, they also do virtual meetings. At first, they were always in person, but now sometimes there can be virtual meetings. And so if that advocate isn't there in your area in person, then she or he may be able to participate from a different location. And so that can give you more options to have an advocate with you. So I think it is helpful to have someone with you. Now, in my experience, we did not bring my daughter with us initially. This year, she is now in high school. This is her second year in high school. And this year, she participated in her first meeting. And so we had her there because soon, very soon, she will be advocating for herself on a collegiate level. And so it is important for her to really understand and feel comfortable talking to different administrators. And so I think it is helpful, again, to prepare your child. So for us, I asked her some mock questions, like it was an interview, but not to make it scary. So she already knew what I had done in the past. My husband is more of a laid back type of person when it comes to advocacy and these experiences. So at first he was like, oh, do you really want me there? But I felt like it was very important for him to also attend. And while he didn't say much, just having him there just was reassurance for me. And it made me feel like, although I was apprehensive at first, I felt more empowered because we were doing it together as a family. And so that was very helpful to me. And I think you have to kind of survey, who in your space and in your community and in your family and in your friend group do you want to be there with you? And, sometimes we feel like we can just champion this thing on our own. And I think that's fine too. So you don't have to have someone else there with you. But for me, it was important for me to have some other people there with me. Now, I mentioned earlier that you can talk to the clinicians. Sometimes they have a person at your child's hospital or place of care that will also attend the meeting with you. And so that is also important. So look at who you have in your space that can also go with you. So I think you kind of have to do a little, more research to kind of see who can be there with you so that you're able to feel like you have that support, regardless of whatever, is being said, that you feel like you're not alone in this particular experience. I think is very important because, the laws are there, but sometimes you do have to point out different things, and it can be helpful to have an advocate. Sometimes, people may shy away from getting an attorney to go with them that is, because of the cost. And I think, when you face some pushbacks in the past, sometimes you may need to get an attorney to be there with you. And that is a needed and an expense that is worth it because they know the law. I know we all wish we could have Piper with us when we go.
I'm not so sure about that, but.
But I think that's just one of the ways that you can approach these meetings.
So I was a prosecutor in New York City at the height of murders and homicides, and I was in homicide investigations. And that's where I learned so many things, and I think how to be an effective lawyer. I approach things forensically. A client comes in, my heart breaks, I have to be strong and utilize the law. So I have another document, I'm promoting my documents today. It is called a FERPA request, Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Please use that document, fill it in, send it to your school. That entitles you to the complete copy of your child's educational file. I mean, sometimes I get like this, it's a lot. That's where the information is that you need to advocate. Take a deep breath before you look at the documents. There will be things in there you never saw before, you had no idea. And then there will be missing documents. Try and look at that information because this is data-driven. You may also see there's not much data. But I think that's really important. The other thing is you have a right. And those FERPA docs have to be provided, I believe, within 30 days by school districts. Some of them give them for free. Some of them will tell you can go in there and look at them. Then you go in and you take pictures because you need the documents. The preparation for the meeting, you have a right to receive all documents that will be discussed in these meetings at least 3 days in advance. You need to keep everything in writing, and collaborative. And this is your team. Kindly provide all documents that will be discussed at the upcoming meeting at least 3 days in advance, all right? Does that mean you're gonna get them? No. Often you will, but if you get them at the last minute and they're asking you a gazillion questions and saying if you agree or don't agree, you say, thank you so much. I would like some time to look at this and I'll get back to you. So the other thing, I'm sort of going backwards here, these meetings, you can walk in, it's like 5,000 people and you're on the other side. Are you kidding me? So I love what Elle said, try to take somebody with you. The other thing is, do your own detective work. Talk to the janitor, talk to the crossing guard, talk to the nurse. They're gonna tell you, these are your angels. They often are not allowed to speak up, but they are watching. So gain and gather information from these individuals. You do not name them in the meetings because they can get in trouble, and they are cafeteria. They're a tremendous resource to you. That's where you can find the information.
I just wanted to add that sometimes when you go to these meetings, you feel like you have to say everything all at once. You have to just pile everything in there and get it all out because this is your only time. Well, it's not your only time. Because if you need to reevaluate, you can. And I think about my own experience with my daughter. When she went to school, we actually had a teacher. So prior to her going to school, I knew she had some very unique challenges because of her health condition. And I did my research, turned in my papers, and, I had a list of accommodations that I, really thought were necessary for her. And in my very first parent-teachers conference, I learned that one of her teachers said to me, well, when she comes to my class, she seems tired, and so I have her standing in the corner to stay awake. Well, the way my daughter's illness presents itself often is she has extreme fatigue. That's not something she can control. She wasn't tired and looking fatigued because she just stayed up all night. It was because she has both sickle cell disease and type 1 diabetes, which both can cause her to feel extra tired. And so, sometimes you don't have to disclose what your child's illness is. And I felt like it was very necessary for me to tell her exactly what those illnesses were, because if this is my child's experience, how many other kids are having similar experiences? And so I knew I had to speak up in that moment. And when I told her, she was a mom too. And this morning we heard someone say, doctors are humans. Well, teachers and educators are also human. So when I explained to her, what my daughter's conditions was, how it presents within her, she really felt very apologetic. And it never happened again. But you do have to talk to your child. You have to find out, is everything being done the way, it's written on paper? Are those accommodations being met? Because sometimes on paper, things look a certain way, but in reality, they're not that way. So just because you're saying one thing, you have to continue to follow up, and you may have to have a meeting in the future to make sure everything is okay.
Thank you.
You can request meetings anytime. So you can request additional 504 meetings, you can request IEP meetings, you put it in writing, and if they're saying no, there are ways that can be addressed. Yeah, you know what? I'm from a small town in the Midwest, and now I live near New York City. There's a real disparity in states and what is available and what isn't. And there is a shortage of teachers and qualified people, and sort of going a different. I think what's important, though, is you do not want to go in there and be pounding the table and screaming and yelling, because nobody's going to talk to you. You're going in with your detective hat. And these days, these meetings, I don't know, I feel like I live in Hollywood Squares. But I watch that room, and I can see who's like this, and then I can see the ones who are trying, and you want to gently ask questions in the meeting to gather more information that your gut instinct is telling you. And you need to try to really work as collaboratively as possible. So when I go into meetings, even as an attorney, one of the first things I say is, it is goal that we work collaboratively together on behalf. You got to remember, we're talking about a child. And when things don't go the way that I think they should go for the client, I will say, we respectfully agree to disagree. Instead of, are you kidding me? I respectfully agree to disagree and then try to gather more information. But yeah, you do need to try to, I mean, think about it. Somebody's yelling at you or going like, you ain't gonna talk to them. You're gonna shut down. So take a deep breath and try to talk to them as gently and respectfully as possible, even when they say something that you really don't like. And that's not easy, but you can do it.
Thank you. That's a great segue into my next question that I have for you, which is, what can you do if you're feeling dissatisfied with the services that your child is receiving? You had mentioned that you can request an IEP or a 504 meeting at any time. It's not just a once a year. How do you go about doing that? What does that process look like? And how do you make sure that your child's needs are being met, perhaps mid-year, if you're feeling like they need attention?
So I did have another experience with a different teacher, and it wasn't until I received my daughter's report card that I noticed the problem. And it kind of was a shock, because I noted, so my daughter had been sick for about a week. For her, when, during the winter, sometimes kids can catch germs, and so she was sick. And I noticed that when she got her report card, she had several zeros for in-class warm-ups. And I was like, well, she had excused absences. She couldn't be there because she was sick. It was well documented, because at her school, we have to turn in when our kids are ill and why. We had doctor's notes because she had seen the doctor. And so what I didn't know is her school wasn't updating so they get progress reports. They weren't updating the progress reports in real time. And so I did not realize she still had zeros from that week when she was in school. And so, of course, the moment I saw her report card, I contacted the teacher and I contacted the administrator. They were all copied on the same email. And the teacher said, well, I'll speak to you, of course, with the principal and others, but that conversation continued to be delayed because it was at the end of the school year. And it was just, I continued to just follow up. I would let every parent know, document when you contact them, the dates, because really, if you have that trail, they will contact you and you'll be able to say, this is what I did. And so because of that, I was able to speak to them and basically get everything resolved before this school year. And so it did take persistence. Don't give up. My daughter was like, well, Mom, it's not a big deal. The school year is over. But I don't want her to think that even though, she has these accommodations, if something doesn't go right, she just has to accept it if it's not right, if it's unjust. And my husband even said, what's done is done. But I said, but it wasn't right. And I had my documentation. And so I was able to go back and it was taken care of. So I just encourage everybody, yes, you don't go in angry or belligerent. I was very calm because I had my documentation. So, make sure you're paying attention to all of the information the school sends you, and you document when you contact them. And so for me, our process is to contact the administrators and the educator.
One of the best things, I agree with Elle, and takes a tremendous amount of energy. Try to keep a running document, because what was said was never said, right? That's not what you said. You didn't say that. And things can get misinterpreted. It's common for districts to start making phone calls. I know sometimes I'll hear, once they hear that I'm representing a client, my client's phone starts ringing off the hook. And they can call from cell phones and all kinds of places trying to gather information. So I think what's really important, again, is to try to keep everything in writing. And if you do receive that phone call, listen, and then you can follow up with an email as to what the discussion occurred with the goal. Thank you for reaching out. Look forward to continuing to work together collaboratively on behalf of my child. The documents and the timelines are so important. I just helped somebody in a Title IX investigation, and I don't know where they got the strength or the fortitude to do this, but they went back and made a timeline, because you start wondering, if you're just imagining things, is it really that bad? Is it really that bad? I don't know. This team is telling me everything's great. I'm just like a, and it's just how kids are. Follow your gut. Try to keep a document so you can see what's really going on, and then you can be a better advocate.
Thank you. Well, I had mentioned early on that my daughter is a homebound student, and what that looks like for us is that she receives all of her school services in home. She still has an IEP with our home district, but her speech, physical therapy, occupational therapy, all of the services that she would receive in a school setting, she receives in home. Her special education teacher comes to our home a couple of days a week and does instruction in home. Can you talk a little bit about the laws covering homebound students who need school services in home due to being immunocompromised, medically fragile? My daughter has a lot of seizures, so she's a high risk for hospital admission, especially during the winter months. So it's just not safe for her to be in a classroom setting at this point in her life. So if you were to find yourself in that situation, how would you go about requesting homebound services, and what does that look like?
You need a letter from a doctor stating why and the reasons, and that draft letter could contain some of that information and fill it in, and then they need to go a step further why that is necessary. Often then the school nurse or administrator will want to talk to the doctor. And what needs to occur then is, if under an IEP, you have a right to special education and related services, PT, OT, speech and language, all of those things, because those services are needed to provide your child the tools so they can access their education. On a personal note, when I was paralyzed, this lasted a long time, I remember how angry, how frustrated my body just, felt terrible. Whenever you have challenges that require the physical therapy, the speech and language, those other areas, the occupational therapy, I can speak for myself, my body just wasn't regulated. It just wasn't regulated. It didn't feel good. And after those services, and then my system started calming down, then I could be more available to learn and interact. So I think it's imperative that your doctor notes what related services are needed and why, and all of those be implemented in the home setting.
The next question I wanted to ask is, at what age do children typically enter the school system? When can you expect that first IEP meeting to take place? I know for my daughter, at least until the age of, I think, 3, she was in early intervention services and then transitioned over to the school system. So can you talk a little bit about what that process looks like?
So I'll share my experience. It was my daughter's pediatrician who recommended that I homeschool them. That's why I was so afraid about the school system. When I look back at other caregivers in my communities, I realize there are services that can exist well before your child is school age. So you don't wait. If you notice different milestones aren't being met, that is when you talk to your pediatrician, primary care physician, family doctor, whoever your child is seeing for their health care, you talk to them first and they will help you get services. And often it is connected with the school system eventually, because your child, for kindergarten will then be able to go to school. And so I think the moment you realize that your child may need extra services is when you start to advocate for them to get special services.
So the law starts at age 0. Well, not quite, right? An hour maybe. So it's birth to 3. And the obligation is on the school districts. There are birth to 3 programs, and they must evaluate for free. Well, it's not free, right? They have an obligation to evaluate in all areas of suspected disability and provide services. That's often called an IFSP. And then when you enter the school district, that becomes the IEP. Same concept, but I think, you do want to talk to your doctors, but you need to know you have rights, birth to 3, under IDEA, and it exists.
Thank you. When you sit down in an IEP meeting, you often talk about your child's strengths first. That's typically how an IEP meeting will start off, and then you'll move into creating goals for that school year. What can you do if you feel like you're not being heard by your school team, or you're unhappy with one of the goals that's being created for your child, or you feel that they may not be able to meet that goal, or perhaps the goals are not aggressive enough? What do you do in that situation?
So I think you speak up. It's one thing to hear it and just be disgruntled on the inside, but that's really just going to eat you up. So you have to say something. And we talked a lot about documenting throughout the entire process. So document, this may be a time where you need to pull in an advocate, pull in an attorney, because you want to make sure that you're doing what you can to get your child the services so that they will meet those goals. So you may want to consult with somebody who knows more about this than you do and find out the best steps that you take next. So that would be my advice.
The IEP has many teeth. PLOP, FAPE, and also Section 504, you have a right to full evaluations, just so you know. It's the same thing, you have a right to full evaluations. An IEP, there have to be, in a column, present levels of performance. You have to know where your child is, so you actually can measure progress. Very important. Goals and objectives must be measurable and objective. Does this make any sense? Does this have 50,000 things to it? What are you measuring? What are you not measuring? Where's the data? Who is measuring it? How do you know it's actual progress? If you're looking at an IEP, does this look like last year's? Except maybe it's like 3 more words. Well, that's not okay. Why isn't it working? And what can happen sometimes is students with disabilities are held to a lower standard, and like second-class citizens. That's not how this goes. It doesn't go that way at all. And you are your child's voice. Information, data. I see so many challenges when cases come in with the goals and objectives, just like, whoa, what's going on? And then you can't really measure progress. And it's amazing on progress reports, right? It's like, status fix it, and then always master it at the very end. So what I also recommend, your child, got a little carried away there. They say your child can cite the Gettysburg Address. Isn't that amazing? One day, maybe you ask Julie to cite the Gettysburg Address. So you'll see they can say things in the document that your child is doing, they can't do. Handwriting's great. Well, maybe they write something out for you. Can spell. Let's write something together. Yeah, right? Yeah. He can't wait.
He can't recite the
What happens
Gettysburg
when
Address.
you go and you say, I sat him down and he can't recite the Gettysburg Address? They look at us and say, same situation, different goal. They say, well, he can do it for us.
Of course he can. Isn't that amazing?
But how do you do anything? They won't
Well,
let you
because you
watch.
take
They
a
won't
little
let you
video.
observe. They won't let us
You're
observe.
having a film movie at home. Or record. Can I like, hey, can we talk about the alphabet? Let's do this together. It's okay, like I want to record, if so, I want to hit this. So, and you show. And that's very common. Well, we don't see that here. One other thing I want you guys to be aware of, when your child starts exhibiting behaviors, they can often act like a student, they can say, what's going on at home? Or we don't see that here, or if there's behaviors are communication for students. If there are more and more behaviors, it's because the program is not working. And what I see happening sometimes is then they then want to label the student with an emotional disability and dismiss them. And I do represent a lot of students with emotional disabilities, but I see that happening sometimes as if the child is intentionally acting up. And that's when you need more information and data. There's another thing called a BCBA, Certified Behaviors, that can come in, collect data. What's happening? So yeah, there's a lot of sources out there, but follow your gut, you're right. And then I'll have clients, they'll say like, they write like perfectly, and then I'll say, could you like have your child write out the alphabet for me? Or write a sentence, and then you can see it. Ask for work samples too, and also find out, is your child actually doing the work? Or is a parent doing it for them, or somebody else? The other thing is homework. That can be a nightmare. So you're not in 3rd grade or 4th grade, your child is. So what I often recommend, if your child comes home and has work, and they can't set a time limit, just let them do what they can do, and then make a note on it. Spent 15 minutes, child melted down, child did not understand. Because otherwise, the homework comes back beautifully. But you just spent your whole night there in a lot of frustration and aggravation. And we're not able to figure out where the actual present level of performance is, which is what needs to drive the IEP.
Thank you. What I commonly tell parents in any situation, be it educational, medical, or otherwise, is that you are the expert on your child and you are the best person, to advocate for their needs. I also think it's important, though, to not go into these meetings with your hackles up. You need to keep the teamwork makes the dream work mentality. My daughter's entire team, I call them Team Kenzie. Anyone who touches Kenzie in any way is part of Team Kenzie. And I try to really facilitate this culture of teamwork and camaraderie, because I feel like we all need that. However, in order for that to be a functional and productive model, I really have to continuously keep that teamwork attitude and mentality. And we all want Kenzie to progress and develop. And I guess if I could impart any part of my journey as wisdom for you, that would be what I would say. If you were to impart any piece of advice to a family ready to embark on their educational journey, perhaps for the first time, or maybe one who's already sort of in it but is burned out and frustrated, what would that advice be?
So I want everybody to know that with your child being in school, there are resources and tools available to them. Don't give up. Don't take no for an answer. Don't feel like you can't go back and say, hey, we need to talk about this again. Be consistent and diligent. And I know in my own experience, I've had to be diligent. I feel like if I could go back in time, I would not have homeschooled her. I felt like in some ways I was kind of bullied in that direction. And so my advice to families is don't allow anyone to cause you to lose sight of making sure that your child gets an excellent education, because that is what we all are afforded. And it is something that is attainable for all of us. It may take a little work, but be up for the fight. Just like you partner with your child's healthcare team, partner with their academic team. It can get better. I now have a wonderful relationship with my daughter's school, and they said, oh, will you come and talk to the other parents? So it has been a 360 experience, but when you speak up, when you advocate, often they will see that you're committed to this for the long haul. You're not really trying to go against them, you're trying to work with them, and that's important.
I cannot tell you how many times I have mothers break down hysterically, and they say to me, I can't believe I didn't know. I can't believe I didn't know. I can't believe I didn't fight harder. And they feel like they gave up on your child. And I say to them, that's not your job. That was a school's job. Here are some tools. Let's get some evaluations. Be kind to yourself. Be kind. And that kindness and compassion you need to then try your best ability in this team. So you notice, this is what I'm noticing going on with my child. What do you recommend? What are some ideas? Try to put it out there so that you can then get engagement with the team to brainstorm. Lots of them have ideas. See if they can come in and actually talk. And then remember that in some school districts, they see what's going on, but they aren't allowed to speak up because they can lose their jobs. But you'll notice on those Hollywood Square meetings when they're head nodding, oh, they hear you, and keep going. I've been in meetings before and I've left and I've had teachers walk by me and say, keep going, keep going. Know that there are many people in these teams that are really cheering for you, and don't give up. And be kind to yourself.
Thank you. I want to make sure that we build in enough time for questions. So I think at this time, we'll go ahead and transition to questions and answers.
I have a question about homeschooling. So my son's autoimmune compromised. He's got severe autism. He's nonverbal. He's 16, like a 2-year-old. He's in diapers. I mean, he's got OT, PT, speech, everything. When the doctors started saying he couldn't go to school because he has open wounds on his hands, he touches everything, he licks everything, my school said, no, we can safely serve him here. So we started getting more letters from doctors, and he almost died at a certain point. And so following that, we didn't bring him back to school. And for 4 years, they wouldn't provide him with services. We'd had letters from the chief of pediatrics, and they would say that the IEP team gets to make the final decision on where the child can be educated, and home is a more restrictive environment. So we just want a due process, court order to come to our home. We've got over almost 3,000 hours of comp ed, so that was great. But now they're in my home, and they're doing things like, we don't toilet him in the bathroom. We change his diaper outside. He's 16, he's big, he touches things, he licks things. It's everything we ask them not to do, they do. And they tell us it's educational environment. What do you do as a parent when you have a safety concern when they're in your home and you request them and things have occurred, like he's acting up and we're doing exactly what you said, like these behaviors occurred, they never happened. These are safety concerns now. He ate his poop because, sorry everybody. I just got an email from her today. They tell me that they will refuse services in my home if I don't let this an educational setting, and they make the rules, not me. What do you do when you're in your home and you have a procedure at home? We have a procedure. What do you do? I don't even I'm doing everything you guys say. We email, we fight, we win, and then we still lose. I'm not allowed to speak to anybody, so I can't talk, I can't collaborate. They're saying we're creating a diaper programming, we are doing this, but I thought we were part of the IEP team. So what do you do when you're just getting stonewalled or retaliated against?
Wow, I'm sorry what you're going through. Districts actually do have the responsibility to educate, and I do a lot of out-of-district placements that districts have to pay for. So if there is and some of them are in different parts of the country and all over, but the district has a responsibility to educate your child. That's not in the home setting. Usually, some it is, if it's a rare disease. But with something, and I can just speak generally, I don't know your child, but there can be a lot of regression if you don't have the consistencies and the structure in the schedule, and there will be a lot more behaviors. So a certified behaviorist is required to come in, a BCBA, but there has to be an appropriate FBA program. The behaviors are going to move and change. And my question would be, if somebody approached me, I would wonder where are the programs in the area, in the community, that can actually provide an education. That's like, you can't do that. Pardon? Oh, for his health. My sincerest, I didn't realize in addition to autism, it's also health. Okay, that's very different.
No, we're like the very minority who are saying he needs to be educated safely at home.
Yes.
And then they said no, and it was some letters from the chief pediatric state.
Okay.
And they would say, the IEP team disagrees with the doctor.
Okay.
They finally won.
Oh, wow.
And they're at home and they're causing more problems.
Yeah.
And they won't, they're telling me in my own home that I can't say where they're in a diaper room.
Okay. So, well,
Like everything I say, they say no to, but this is a health concern.
yes. Wow. So you need to find the experts in the area, if possible. All this is very expensive, but if you can find the outside BCBA and the outside providers that say what your child needs, if the school is afraid to come in, then they've got to pay for people to come in that aren't trained. One thing I sometimes recommend clients do is the Freedom of Information Act. You have a right to get a copy of the person's credentials and their training, and sometimes that's a place to start. Do they actually have the training or the expertise? And if they don't, try to find out who in your community does, and you would advocate for those people to then come in. It's not an easy journey. Whenever something there, I'm not sure what state you're in, but due process hearing requests can be. Pardon?
We just finished one in one.
There you go. There you go. That's your answer. When you get that far, you gotta go to that.
And we went, and now they have to come to our home.
Well, you might have to file again. You might have to file again. It's exhausting. It is exhausting. Yeah, it is exhausting. I am sorry. And yes, your story, I hear these. It's so hard when I get calls because people are in crises. Who wants to call a lawyer? But yeah, it's a broken system. Keep fighting.
There's also the Office of Civil Rights.
Yeah, Office of
where
Civil
you
Rights.
can file a complaint and they can follow up on it as well.
That's okay. Sorry, one other question. This was for all of us rare disease parents. So this has also occurred with us, and then it kind of got sideswiped with COVID. My son has an ultra-rare, very complex genetic disorder, neurological. He is the first kid in the US diagnosed ever. And we started building, we came to Global Genes, started a foundation, started finding families, and so we started a center of excellence at Mount Sinai, New York. And they would do full 3-day evaluations of our kids, and they knew that, they know how their brain works, they know how they learn, they know how they sleep. Just like you said, they seem tired, but they're not, but you have to do these breaks and these sensory things, right? And they know that these kids, because they have this neuroplasticity blocking gene, need higher frequency and higher durations of services. And they sat down and said, your kid's grossly underserved at school. And they cross over medical recommendations and write educational recommendations on our document. IDEA states right now that schools only have to consider outside evaluations, and they pretty much just went like this into the garbage. So I spent the summer and I got 7 more individual evaluations that complemented the fine motor, gross motor, all these things to show that this is how delayed he was, this is the biggest deficit, and that they all agreed with the Seaver evaluation recommendations. The school went like this. If you have a rare disease, no school can be an expert. How do we, as the rare disease community, go after IDEA and say, this needs to be changed for rare disease people? If a center of excellence understands the educational requirements, they're not OTs and PTs saying this is the type, this is the service, this is the plan, the duration and time and frequency that they need because of their rare disease. How do we get them to no longer have to just consider it, which means throw it in the trash? How do we get them to have to follow it?
FAPE, free, appropriate, public education. So, as you can see, right, it sounds like, again, I don't know, but things are not going the way they should, because it sounds like the district, you have a right to a free, appropriate public education, which means your child has to make continued progress and not regress, and often these services are needed. They do have to consider, but they don't have to follow every single recommendation. But if they're not implementing a program where your child can progress, that is the denial of FAPE. And that's where a case like this lies. And you filed for due process and you won. And that's the Office of Civil Rights is actually an interesting option. You can't have 2 cases going at the same time. They don't always take everything. But what happens when the Office of Civil Rights takes a case, they come in, it is literally a district's worst nightmare. And they collect so much information and so much data. And they then create a recommended plan, but they really can hold the district. It really can help be a game changer sometimes. A really long process. And the Department of Justice is another one, DOJ. You may want to reach out to some of your local congressmen, representatives, maybe. Board of Education. Board of Education often doesn't even know what's going on. There's different lawyers that represent Board of Eds versus administrators, so your Board of Education is generally the one that hires the superintendent, and they're ultimately responsible. There's a bunch of money that's then given to the Director of Special Education, and that's sort of the power structure. The Board of Ed often has no idea what's going on because there's confidential agreements. So sometimes I have my clients reach out to the Board of Education. So often structures, I can't speak for all states. I can speak for Connecticut, not New York City. It's all very different. But you have your Board of Education. They then hire the superintendent. Superintendent's got X amount of money, and then they delegate down. So often people are like, I'm going to go to the superintendent. But often the superintendent's not even involved because they have delegated the power and responsibility to the Director of Special Education, or they have different names. That's who's got the power. A lot of times, depending on the district, They're backed by law firms. Some are very aggressive, and others actually ultimately do the right thing. And
Next question. I want to make sure that we get time to answer another couple of questions.
I just have a couple quick comments, and so if someone has a question that's more urgent, I'm happy to pass the mic off. This is my area of passion. I love this session. I think you all have done such a great job explaining so many things, so thank you so much. My husband is a prosecutor, and my background is in teaching in New York City, so some overlap there with Piper. I was wanting to highlight that there's always a next step for families. You're never done. You're never at the end of the road with trying to get what you need for your child. So whether it's that state complaint, due process hearing, you can always keep going, do it again. And there's going to be a point perhaps where you do have to look into legal counsel. And every state has legal aid as an option if retaining an attorney isn't something that you can afford or are able to do. So that was just one point I wanted to make, which you all already started to touch upon. And then in the IEP meeting, if you're reaching like a point where you cannot agree, which does happen, make sure they put it in the notes. There is always a notes piece to the IEP, and make sure they write, parent does not agree. Parent says X, make the bullet points in the notes, because those notes are just documenting what happened in the meeting. So it doesn't mean that it's part of the legal document, but then when you take it to that next step, if it is due process, whatever the next step is, the IEP contains that information, and have them put all of that there. You don't have to sign it. You don't have to sign. Correct. They'll make you sign that you were at the meeting, but you can wait, and you don't have to sign. You can say, I need 24 hours to review it, et cetera. So those are just quick things I wanted to make sure to share.
That's fantastic information. So you don't have to sign off on the IEP. They may say you don't. And then what you were saying, there's another way. Sometimes it's painful to read these documents, but you need to try to look in the notes section and the prior written notice. And sometimes, I mean, they're written by the school districts, right? And that's not your understanding of what actually occurred. Or so what you do is you do an addendum, and you send it to the team and ask that it be distributed to every member of the team. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but now you have the document, because I've been in cases before and like the parent didn't say anything. Oh, yes, they did. I can't help it that your notes don't say that they said something. So that's wonderful what she just shared. Try to do an addendum. Yes.
And that's true in your child's care, whether they're at school or when they're getting services in the hospital as well. So you want to do it the exact same way.
Okay, we're going to have our last question here.
I thank you for this session. It's really informational. I wish my parents actually had some of this information back in the early 2000s. But I really, my question is, for the higher education, such as the colleges, community colleges, and higher education of that, do the schools have the legal right to actually recognize your IEP or 401 or 5014 plan? I myself was denied IEP services or the special services through the community college because they said, well, you had to have a special or some sort of medical condition. And thankfully I did, but if I didn't have one, my services would be denied at that community college. And I think I don't really know what my parents really thought of, I guess maybe processing on what to do. But I mean, I think I don't know if any other people still face those challenges and what like the legal rights for those at the higher education level, for those that are in the higher like functioning area of their disability.
Yeah, so the IEP converts to a 504. A 504 plan. There are no IEPs in college. The 504 ADA rights follow people through their lives. You do not have to disclose when your child is applying to college that they have a disability. You may want to look around to try to find programs that are known to have good offices that support people with disabilities. And then you have to have all your documentation in a row, that draft letter filled out. You may need an updated neuropsych. And then you have to go and advocate. Once your child has this, they literally need to go and talk to every single professor, and which is hard to share. So the accommodations are enforced. If you are denied You have to go backwards to go forwards, which is to get the right documentation from your treatment providers, showing what reasonable accommodations are in this case. And there can be a lot.
To close our session, I just wanted to mention, if you select our session on your CVent app, you're able to access the resources that we have listed, the letters templates that Piper had mentioned, and then we have a few slides of information sort of capturing what was discussed in this session. And if you have any specific questions for either or any of us, you are able to message us directly through the app. And with that, we'll thank you so much for attending our session today.